Welcome to Liquid Assets. I'm your host, Ravi Karani. Liquid Assets is a podcast where we talk about the intersection of business, policy, and technology, all as it looks at water.
Imagine a world where your toilet flush helps cool a skyscraper. Sounds like science fiction? Think again. I'm Ravi Karani, and on this episode of Liquid Assets, we're diving into the future of urban water reuse with Kyle Pickett, co-founder of the William J. Worthen Foundation. From battling the Yuck factor to harnessing cutting-edge membrane technology, we'll explore how innovative thinking is transforming our relationship with water. Did you know that a single building in San Francisco is saving over 7 million gallons of potable water annually? That's just the tip of the iceberg. Kyle's not an expert. He's a visionary on a mission to make complex water concepts accessible to everyone. We'll unpack the surprising links between water conservation and climate change, and how a holistic approach to water stewardship could reshape our cities. Get ready for a mind-bending journey through purple pipes, gray water systems, and revolutionary ideas that are turning our water challenges into opportunities. By the end of this episode, you'll see the hidden potential flowing through every drain. Are you ready to rethink everything you thought you knew about water?
Hi, my name is Kyle Pickett. I am the co-founder and VP of the board for the William Worthen Foundation. It's a design and policy and practice network for people working in the design, construction, and related industry.
Kyle, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ravi. Thanks for inviting me to chat with you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for coming on. I know both of us have a ton of stuff going on. You're like moving out of the Bay. I already moved out of the Bay to New York, but thanks a ton for taking the time.
It's an important conversation. Happy to be part of it.
So I want to jump right into the William J. Worthen Foundation. We had talked a little bit about that during our kind of pre-call, but can you just kind of talk about what is the foundation? How did you get into it? Your story there is absolutely amazing, so I'm not going to give any spoilers. I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Awesome. So the William Worthen Foundation is named after my late life partner and business partner, Bill Worthen. We started a company called Urban Fabric. We are a sustainability consulting and communications practice with an office here in San Francisco and also in New York City. We really focus on LEED type certifications, WELL certifications for buildings, for projects, but then also expanding the conversation around the value add that sustainability brings to a developer or to an owner. So we won a project called 181 Fremont. It's an 800-foot mixed-use tower here in San Francisco. The J. Paul company, the owner, wanted the building to be LEED Platinum, but the only way to get there was through some sort of resource stewardship strategy within the building. Geothermal wasn't going to work, wind energy, solar, all of those things weren't going to work. The only way to hit LEED Platinum was through a water reuse strategy. So it was pretty new here in San Francisco. We helped write Article 12C, which is the initial mandate around water reuse in new construction over 250,000 square feet. So that was a conversation that we were having with the developer. But at that point, water reuse still was very much a yuck factor. Their response to us was, there is no way we're going to put a water reuse system in our luxury tower. So we recognized real quickly that there needed to be some education with developers, designers, and owners around water reuse as a strategy, as a viable strategy within buildings, because it is all over the world. Australia, Israel, Japan, they've all had systems in operation, not to mention direct potable reuse in Africa. So there was an opportunity here to kind of demystify really technical information and bring things down to digestible chunks of text and infographics. And we did that through the arm of the Urban Fabric Collaborative, which is the nonprofit arm to our for-profit company. Midway through the production of our water reuse practice guide, Bill passed away. And so we recalibrated the organization to a foundation in his name, and then carried on the production of this water reuse practice guide, which we released to the public in January of 2018. And then everything it hit the market and it went everywhere. Literally spent 200,000 airline miles going to different conferences talking about water reuse as a design strategy. And so this was really an opportunity to really uplift the conversation and have a meaningful conversation around the yuck factor, the technical components of water reuse within buildings, but then also what does it mean as a potential differentiator for owners and developers in the marketplace. So the foundation continued on a life of its own. We just published 7 volumes of our building decarbonization practice guide. So the whole goal of the organization is to take really technical topics and demystify through infographics and digestible chunks of text so that anyone, whether you are a policymaker, a developer, a student, can pick up one of our guides and just become better informed about that topic.
That's super inspirational. And it's so funny you say that, because one of the goals of this podcast is to kind of make it a lot more approachable for the regular layperson to understand what is water, right? A lot of water policy is convoluted. Just the way that we even use water is kind of obstructed. Like, people don't know that a lot of it goes to agriculture. A very small portion of it go back into the households for taking showers. And so, like, just kind of really bringing to the top of mind of the consumer that, hey, look, we can actually with our money make decisions on the products we buy that have particular usage of water. It's just really inspirational to hear that 7 volumes in of kind of decarbonization as well is the larger goal of water being one small part of that as well.
Yeah. And water, energy, and carbon are all inextricably linked. We cannot decouple of those things, but that is the tendency that we deal with. Here in California, approximately 7% of the state's energy budget goes to pumping water up and over the Grapevine to the LA basin. Also, additionally, the water supply line down to Southern California goes through the Central Valley, where there's a lot of groundwater pumping for agriculture. California is one of those top producing agricultural regions. So it's a really important economic component of the conversation. But again, because there's been so much groundwater pumping, it's actually causing land subsidence in that Central Valley. And so, like around Fresno, there's about 16 feet of land subsidence, which impacts infrastructure like rail, road, the water supply lines down to Southern California. There's really a lot of opportunity to have a much more holistic conversation around water. Water is life, but we have an expectation that when we turn on the tap, that it will be there. And then once it goes down the drain, we don't even think about it anymore. And we can't continue that kind of business as normal. We actually need to be thinking about water in a much more holistic, kind of strategy. And actually, there's a group here in California called it's a Localizing California Waters Conference.
Okay.
And so they bring stakeholders together from urban, agriculture, forestry, fisheries, tribes, etc., because watersheds don't have boundaries. I mean, they have boundaries, but they don't stop at like a county boundary or a state line. So we need to also have better conversations with the various stakeholders around what does it mean for a holistic kind of water stewardship kind of strategy. But then also at the same time, there's tribes have thousands of years of land management practices. They have all this knowledge. It's mostly, verbal, some passed down, but we need to be able to connect with tribes and that indigenous knowledge and uplift them as part of the means to also address our water needs going forward. Why not take advantage of that kind of knowledge and skill set?
That's so interesting you say that. I kind of imagine 2 sides of the spectrum is where using technology, right, to gather data, information, and knowledge from the kind of world around us, right? There's all these agricultural sensors, all these pump sensors. But if you look at the other side of the spectrum, this book, Braiding Sweetgrass, kind of comes to mind of there is a ton of indigenous knowledge of people that used to live here that have worked with the land, that know the land. And that, in a sense, is also another data stream. It's another knowledge stream, right? And so if you connect both of those together, we're going to be a lot more smarter and wiser about what we're doing versus kind of looking at looking at one particular thing or one particular data stream entirely.
Well, and we need to keep at it too. I totally agree, Ravi. But we also need to keep at it. California got a whole bunch of precipitation last year. Our reservoirs are pretty full at the moment. And so people are kind of kicking back on their laurels and be like, okay, well, the emergency is over. Well, that's not how climate works. That's not how weather patterns work. That's not planning for the future. That is living in the moment. And if we're going to continue to advance the economic engine that is California and the US, we need to be smarter about our water policies, because water goes into manufacturing, goes into silicon manufacturing, it goes into agriculture production. There's drinking water in our toilets right now. So flushing our toilets with drinking water is waste. We need to change that methodology as well. So there's a lot of opportunity to have better conversations, but I think the key is meeting people where they are. And our early conversations in the firm with water reuse strategies as a means for building certifications, the yuck factor was very pervasive. So our team decided, well, if we can't have fun doing what we're doing, well, why are we doing this? And so our team decided that the poop emoji was going to be our little mascot. So we had poop emoji buttons, hats. There was a big tool float. It's pretty crazy. But we found that with the yuck factor, these kinds of conversations are difficult for some people. And so if we can start the conversation with some ice breaking, with some of the poop jokes are endless. We like to say that water has all been dinosaur poop before. What we have is what we have, right? So what we're trying to do is just accelerate the filtration process, celebrate the natural processes that happen geologically that filter our water, but do it in such a way that it saves money, saves potable water, and just matches up non-potable supply with non-potable uses, which is the vast majority of our need, especially within commercial buildings.
I want to kind of go back to the 181 Fremont example you gave and kind of the findings that you had. You kind of mentioned two things, right? There was this first is this yuck factor, and then the second is the technical side. I'd love the kind of implementation of infographics and emojis and really making the message simple so that the policymakers, the people that are building the buildings understand what's going on. Let's kind of double click into the yuck factor. You brought that up just a second ago. What strategies did you implement? And if you could kind of verbalize that for the audience, what did you tell to 181 Fremont that got them to understand what is not the yuck factor, or how did you combat that?
Yeah. So a couple things come to mind. We actually took the design team, the leadership design team, and ownership on a tour of systems in operation. So we went down to Sydney, Australia, kind of kicked the tires and lift the lids on some of these systems so that they can see and smell that these methodologies have been in existence for many years. They're proven, they're tested. It won't make your pet sick. That's one of the things about the sales team at 181 Fremont, because the top third is luxury condos. And so the sales team is initially pretty concerned that there could be a discoloration within toilets, that it can make pets sick, that their luxury tenants and buyers may not want something that reuses like that. So between taking the design team and ownership on a tour of systems currently in operation so they can see what's happening. There isn't that odor. They can see the water going through the filtration system and coming out the other end, combined with using a little bit of humor to break down the barrier around that yuck factor so that we can have a much more meaningful conversation. And so we also trained the sales team on talking points related to water reuse. Flushing our toilets with drinking water is waste. California is currently in a drought. I mean, all of these different things. Come to find out, actually, that the vast majority of the sales team didn't even need any of those talking points, because when they started talking to potential buyers of these condos, they're like, cool, no, we shouldn't be doing that. We are in a drought. And so the discriminating buyer recognizes sustainability as being part of a value add to their investment, not just from a water standpoint, but also from that energy use standpoint as well.
Wow. That's kind of a flip of the script where it sounds like initially we had come to the table thinking we need to build up an entire sales team that's going to have the messaging and, all the sales points. But like you just said, a discerning buyer actually finds that as a plus point, and the problems that our buildings don't have them. Right. And so like now when you actually provide them as a product, people are willing to quote unquote buy it.
It's funny though, because it's just like the public, I think, is generally a little bit more ready for the conversation, but developers are pretty conservative. There is a budget. There is a first cost. Dual plumbing a building essentially adds a bunch of cost to include purple pipe as part of the reclaimed water supply. But when we look at water and sewer rates escalation over a national average, we're looking at 7 to 13% nationally between sewage and water escalation rates. So really, for us, the conversation was there were several different things with the developer. One, an initial first cost can protect your investment in the long run by controlling some of those water rates, by reusing a lot of the water on site, or as much as possible on site. The other piece to that too was that because legislation like SB 966, which is one of the last pieces of legislation that Governor Brown signed into law, it directs the California Water Control Board in collaboration with the Building Standards Commission, streamline rules and regulations for on-site reuse across the state. So there was a piece to the conversation with the developer and owner about the value add of having a high level of sustainability within their building, not just from the protection of the asset in the long term, but also differentiating themselves in the marketplace right now. That if they're planning to build a building and flip it for maximum profit, still sustainability is the best way to go. A high level of sustainability is the best way to go because that is added into the overall value of the building once it's flipped. But then if they're holding on to the building as part of a long-term portfolio and strategy, that controls a lot of those long-term O&M costs. So it's a really important and exciting conversation to have. But sometimes owners and developers need their handheld through the process, and recognizing that's where people are and meeting people where they are. That I think is the key to really moving the needle, is to understand where people are, where's the pinch point, what's the hang up, if it's emotional, if it's technical, or if it's psychological. So kind of diving into that, I think it was probably one of the more equally important pieces of developing the resource, but then also recognizing what are people's hangups for not implementing this kind of strategy. Is it policy or code construct? Is it even allowable by code? That's one. What kind of conversations can people have to at least develop a pilot project? Or if it is allowable by code, why aren't we doing it?
And you'd mentioned, just to kind of reiterate, SB 966 was signed in by Governor Brown to basically do reuse across the state, correct?
Yeah, the goal, so I know that the working group has been meeting. The goal is to really fully deploy that legislation in early this next year. But the whole thing was to streamline rules and regs across the state to allow for reuse strategies. Big piece right now is through the international code. It's NSF 350. So there is the Blue Ribbon Commission, which is a group of national PUC or utilities around water and wastewater use, developing strategies to hopefully kind of realign the NSF 350 code so that it's more broadly allowable, not just here in California through SB 966, but a much more broad revision of NS 350 to allow for reuse.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the 181 Fremont, and we had talked about the kind of yuck factor, which completely makes sense. If we move to now the technical side, what does that look like? Like, if we can you can verbalize that to the audience of how'd you explain that? How'd you make it simple? How does the purple pipe work?
Yeah. So there are a number of different technologies out there for water reuse systems. Actually, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission has what they call a living machine around their building. So there's a number of what you see are planners, but the system actually filters through what is essentially an accelerated tidal flow wetland. And so that's how a living machine operates. There's also mechanically based systems, which are much more popular, especially in larger construction. And like 181 Fremont has a membrane bioreactor. So essentially what that does is there are all these little holes in these nanotubes that is the fraction of a width of a human hair. So the water molecules can get through, but then everything else gets trapped. And so what is in 181 Fremont is a membrane bioreactor gray water reuse system. So it's not treating black water, it's not treating salads, it's not treating dishwasher, anything that has like the organics. So it's a gray water system. It's projected to save about 1.3 million gallons of potable water a year when the building is in full operation. And because COVID and the pandemic, that kind of changed things and how people work. And I know that the 2/3 commercial part of that building is undergoing some revisions. So it's unclear what operation will look like based upon the capacity of that building, but we need flows in order to make the system work. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on that side. But like Salesforce Tower has a black water system, and they're Class A commercial, and they're projected to save about 7.1 million gallons of potable water a year because they're treating all that water on site. That includes cooling tower, blowdown, everything from the urinals, toilets, dishwashers, etc. So it can move the needle. One building can move the needle. 7.1 million gallons of potable water a year. Crazy.
Yeah. Can you kind of give us a quick spectrum of what is gray water versus black water? Like because it seems like you can kind of filter everything, or you can filter some things. What does that look like? Where does it start?
Yeah. So Blackwater is everything that includes the biologicals and some of the chemical, like stormwater. Stormwater is extremely dirty. There are oils and minerality that come off of the tires and concrete. So stormwater is very dirty. It would need to go through a Blackwater system. Gray water is essentially all those things of Blackwater, but not toilets, not dishwashers, not cooling tower. So the dirtier supplies of water are considered part of that Blackwater spectrum as opposed to not gray water. But like evaporative cooling, foundation drainage, all of that can be reused, captured and reused on site.
And what happens in a gray water system with the opposite of the stuff that's not being filtered, the cooling water towers, the storm water, the toilets? Does that also just go back in the waste stream again? That goes into...
It does. Yeah,
Okay.
it does. I mean, the real opportunity from a financial benefit is in the Blackwater systems because it does capture everything. But again, you have to dual plumb a building. So what does that mean? You have the original plumbing that brings water in from the street, from the municipal supplies water up through the building from cooling tower. I mean, just all of the things that you need within a building. With membrane bioreactor, we can capture all of that. With Blackwater, we can capture all of that and reuse that water on site. So again, that metric around Salesforce Tower of 7.1 million gallons of potable water a year saved means that a lot of the water that's being produced or used on site can go back through the system and be reused for cooling tower blowdown, for urinal flushing, for non-potable needs. So within a commercial building, up to 90% of the building's water needs is generally non-potable in nature. So there's a lot of opportunity there. In like a multifamily or mixed use, it's usually about 50% of the need within a multifamily building can be non-potable in nature.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of opportunity for reuse.
Recycle anywhere between 90 to 50%, depending on whether you're commercial or residential, of your water for non-potable use, which is basically non-drinking water.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of residential applications as well. I mean, there's a company called Hydroloop out of Europe that is attempting to make a foothold here. That would be a single family residential kind of reuse system. Pretty cool. There's the whole laundry to landscape methodology as well, that you can send that water from the washing machine out to the lawn. Good. So there's a lot of residential applications. The vast majority of the current opportunity, I'll say, because the technology exists and the finance is there, is within multifamily or commercial applications.
Yeah, makes sense. And what's stopping, I guess the question here is, what is the decision between doing it on site, on premise, at the building level, versus, I think about the kind of built environment, right? I mean, especially being here in New York, there's a lot of these older buildings, and I get that 181 Fremont was new and you have to put in new capital expenditure on new construction. But is there an opportunity to do this at the wastewater plant? Like, can you just make a bigger version of this membrane bioreactor, put it at the wastewater plant, and then get them to recycle 50 to 90% and send it back into the drinking, into like the regular water system? Or how, like, why are we doing that? And if we are, what's the difference? What's the discrepancy?
Yeah. Well, right now it's not allowable by code. And that is the fundamental piece to that. So the regulatory environment right now just does not allow for it. And I think that's really what the Blue Ribbon Commission is trying to do, is to streamline those rules and regs nationwide, create kind of policy frameworks. The Blue Ribbon Commission talks about log reduction targets. So that's essentially pathogens within the supply line. The conversation is definitely shifting more to like a health side of things. So what does it mean to protect public health related to water reuse? And I think that's a really, important conversation to have, that the utilities will continue to have. But when it comes down to the brass tacks of that, it's just not allowable by code, which is what SB 966 is meant to do. San Francisco has something called a purple pipe district. So let me take a step back. So Article 12C within the city and county of San Francisco mandates that any new construction over 250,000 per square foot has to have a water recycling system. That legislation was recently updated in the last year to lower that square footage to 100,000. So any new construction over 100,000 square foot in the city and county of San Francisco has to have a water recycling system. There's also in San Francisco something called a purple pipe district. And so ultimately the goal is that the PUC would also be supplying reclaimed water down a purple pipeline down essentially the center of Mission Street and start supplying reclaimed water to some of these buildings that are dual plumb that can take in additional water supplies for their flushing, cooling tower, irrigation needs, etc. So those things, I think, are what the city and county of San Francisco is looking like. I mean, part of the reason why the legislation is even advanced and adopted to begin with is because the area was growing so rapidly that the PUC could not keep up with the infrastructure upgrades needed in order to continue on normal operations. And so to mandate reuse, it actually took some pressure off of the existing infrastructure so they can, I think, more deliberately plan what the future needs are related to the reclaimed water supply lines and the buildings currently being built within the Purple Pipe District. But yeah, it is kind of chicken, egg, horse, cart a little bit, but the basis of this is the code and regulatory construct needs to be redefined to allow for it while also protecting public health.
I'm seeing parallels with the net metering conversation we had from an electrical side, right? Because we had all these solar panels that went up, and Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, or SoCal Edison, a bunch of other states across the US and utilities basically purchased back that energy, and then you could actually get, paid or subsidized to put that energy back in the grid, which kind of makes sense from this Purple Pipe District of, I almost wonder, is there a cheaper rate that you're paying for this purple piped water that's non-potable, or is it kind of still the same rate? Do they have any sort of rate discrepancy?
Well, it doesn't even exist yet. So okay. I know that's part of the future plans is to, put a reclaimed water supply line that is city supplied down the center of Mission to start supplying some of these buildings that are not producing it on site. But yeah, there's related to that question earlier around the utility being able to implement their own membrane bioreactors, and that kind of stuff is happening. So like in Namibia, Africa, they have a direct potable reuse system online where they do mix waste stream water that has been cleaned through reverse osmosis through disinfection needs and then mixed in with potable water supply and sent back to the city. So direct potable reuse is a thing. It's viable. It's actually been in existence in 50 years in Namibia, Africa. So I think that's the future of where we're headed. But, people are like, wait, I'm drinking my wastewater? No. Mm-hmm. So, here in the US, we need to have a much more deliberate, widespread kind of conversation. I think, organizations like the EPA and Water Reuse California, or the parent organization, Water Reuse, has a place, interfacing with the public and getting them used to these ideas, because our water needs are just continuing to escalate and we need to be smarter about it from a much more holistic outlook.
Kyle, I want to change gears a little bit. And I always like to kind of dig deep into the mind of what makes Kyle.
Dig deep or dive deep?
Dive deep. I should say dive deep. Why did you start this sustainability consulting agency? What was kind of, if you were to kind of rewind back, and I know hindsight 2020, there's no straight line to where you are today to what kind of brought you here. But are there any moments that you had or inflection points where you're like, hey, this particular event really got me to think about sustainability or water or whatever that might be?
I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. And so I was raised with kind of a respect for nature and for resource stewardship. It didn't really manifest in the way or in the words of resource stewardship, but it was, we'd go camping and it would be anything we take in, we take out, leave no trace. And so I think that was kind of the early piece for me. And then when my late husband, Bill Worthen, who was FAI, he was a fellow architect and a fellow through USDBC. He was the director for sustainability for the American Institute of Architects for a couple of years. And then when he came back, he was like, well, what should I do? Should I go work for a big firm? Should I hang out my own shingle? And I was like, whatever makes you happy. And so he hung out his own shingle, and within just a few months, I was proofreading his proposals before they would go out because he couldn't spell to save his life or add up a fee table. So suddenly work was being won. And he and I decided that it was best for us to do this together. We had a thing. He was bright lights, shiny things. I was TikTok. How do we get there? How do we deploy? What do people need in order to better understand the strategy that we're proposing or the technical components of a design or a sustainability construct. Does everyone understand that? And so, like, not being the architect in the room, I also had some flexibility and being able to ask and challenge questions around things that are preconceived or standard design practices, but we can think of that in a different way, not being an architect, or at least I'm not an architect. So that really kicked things up for us. And we won Terminal 1 at SFO, 181 Fremont, number of VA hospitals and some wineries and such like that. And then saw an opportunity to open up an office in New York and kind of expand that bright light on the East Coast as well. And that's when we brought in Wolfgang Werner to do that. But it was after Bill passed that the industry looked to me and our directors for leadership and continue to advance the firm, but then also at the same time advance the foundation in its name, where we took a lot of the technical pieces of deploying sustainable action in practice and flip it into meaningful, accessible professional education for the industry through the foundation. And that's where I'm getting a lot of my jollies. I get little goosebumps from the work that we do and the connections that we make. And so I think it's just, so important to, with a topic as big as a changing climate, that water, energy, carbon are inextricably linked, that we recognize that for what it is, that our building stock is a primary offender of emissions. So decarbonizing, doing water reuse. We do water reuse on site with solar energy or wind energy. That's energy that's produced. So if that's a net negative at that point. And I think, I never thought I would be in this world. That's not what I grew up with. But here I am, and with a value around water stakeholder engagement and education. And I love connecting people with these conversations and seeing where we can go together.
Which is actually a perfect segue to, you guys are redoing the water reuse practice guide, which is coming out, I think, next year. Let's talk a little about that. I think we dug really deep. We dove deep into a lot of what we talked about earlier, but what's going to be different in this new guide?
Yeah. So just to kind of frame people with what the original guide was about, back in 2016, 2017, people were just very unfamiliar with water reuse, even as a concept. So introducing people to the concept of water reuse, what does that mean? What are the kind of technologies out there? Is it permittable? Is it allowable within my jurisdiction? If it's not, what are the kinds of questions that I can be asking of my local code officials and regulatory environment to allow for a pilot project? Who are some of the design teams and who are some of the vendors that are at the forefront of this? It's really important for us to remain technology agnostic as a foundation. Here's what you need to know, make the best choice for your project. Introducing and kind of laying out the conversation for water reuse. Why are people uncomfortable with it? Where has it been done before? But then also, where is it going in the future? And that's kind of where we left things off at the end of the water use practice guide. Since then, it's been downloaded over 5,000 times globally. It's part of the UN Global Compact Library of Resources. Again, I spent an embarrassing amount of airline miles in 2018 and 2019 flying around the country, places here in North America to talk about water use as a design opportunity. And so in this new guide, or in this update, we're going to be talking about water stewardship in a much more holistic kind of strategy. Definitely be covering the water reuse policies, but then also this nexus of water, energy, and carbon. There are companies out there that are reusing water on site, that are capturing the biosolids and transforming it into high value compost. There are so many different opportunities out there. And I think we need to, in this update, we're going to be talking about water stewardship as a much more holistic kind of strategy. Who are the stakeholders also involved? What are the kinds of questions that people can be asking? But again, it is a design guide tooled towards developers, owners, architects, and hopefully policymakers as well. And so we hope that our guides are the technical enough for policymakers to become really comfortable with this and work with us on advancing legislation and policies within their own jurisdiction.
That's awesome.
We're aiming to start up next month, actually. So there's a lot in motion, but it's a really exciting time to actually have this conversation.
I'd actually love to, when you guys are done with that, actually host it up on the show notes as well, or potentially on Liquid Assets. I think it'd be great for our audience to also get access to it.
I'm here for it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And it's really awesome you say that. I remember a conversation I was having with John Lane from the International Water Week in Stockholm. And there was a part in the segment that I think is actually live now on Liquid Assets, but it was around basically making a cohesive plan or series of bullet points that you can hand upstream or downstream to everybody from local educators at schools to the city level, to the county level, to even federal government or the state level. And it's this kind of nesting fractal of here's how you can physically actually tangibly do something at the city level, all the way to kind of guide these like larger, more ephemeral policy nudges from like the federal level. And so what you're saying kind of sounds very similar to what we had as a conversation a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it's kind of funny though, because like we love the idea of advancing big ideas, big goals, big, hairy, audacious goals, as we like to say in the firm. But at the same time, it is a grassroots kind of action. So what do designers need to know in order to implement that or incorporate that into their design constructs without really the client asking for it? What does it mean for an engineer to design a dual plumbed building that has other sustainability components to it too? These interlocking components of energy, water, and carbon. I think it's important to have the global view around the water stewardship. But I think the action really happens at the grassroots level. And so I think you mentioned something about essentially the workforce. And we see that as a big opportunity. So on one side, well, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, Paula Kehoe, who's director of water resources here, calls it the silver tsunami. So they have engineers that are terming out, that are retiring, and they aren't enough people coming up through the education system in order to service those systems. Equally or similarly, when it comes to membrane bioreactors and water reuse systems, we don't need a level 1 wastewater engineer taking care of that system. We need a credentialed, skilled technician who can manage these systems as more and more of these systems come online. So the foundation sees it as inextricably linked to the workforce development and to advancing Biden's climate core, is focusing in on what are the educational insights that we can bring in a little sooner. So like working with STEM teachers around what is a water budget, what is an energy audit, what is a carbon calculator, and start kind of priming the pump, as it were, with, let's face it, not everyone is suited for a 4-year college degree, right? There are people coming up through vocational schools and such like that. So also working with vocational schools around what are the curriculums related to water reuse technicians? What is the curriculum for like solar system care, overall care? Not just wiping it down, but what does it mean from like the inverter and stuff like that? So we see it as being not only a designer kind of activity, educating designers and policymakers, but we also see it as priming the pump of our workforce to get more and more of these people skilled and trained in monitoring and maintenance of these systems to kind of fill this need. And yeah, I think it's inextricably linked to the workforce conversation.
Yeah, 100%. Kyle, as we're coming close to the end of the episode, I have a question that I ask all of our guests that we have here. And it's, is there a book or a movie or a show that has had just a large effect on you, potentially like the overview effect, either in the way that you look at the world or the way that you look at the world of water?
My favorite book right now actually is called Emergent Strategy. And it's one of those where it's just like you have ideas. There is a need in the world. How do you advance that need? And how do you actually take that idea, take that kernel and turn it into something that is viable, that essentially has legs to it? There's a lot of kind of psychology to it at the moment too, but like I have 3 priorities. I want to pay the bills, I want to be happy, and I want to make a difference. And so what does making a difference actually look like with the skill set and with what I have to offer? And so kind of diving into that has been actually a lot of fun, and kind of figuring out where, taking some of the things that I'm really care about and turning that into something that is actionable and that can make a difference. My favorite book right now.
We'll throw that up on the show notes. Emergent Strategy.
Yeah.
Kyle, thanks a ton for coming on Liquid Assets. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, Ravi. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. And for all of those of you out there, you can find Liquid Assets wherever you get your podcast. We're also on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram now, and we have a TikTok. So you can get little bits and pieces of these conversations. If you want to listen to Liquid Assets, you can find us at liquidassets.cc or anywhere else you get your podcasts or on YouTube today.